Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 14 of Groove, the No Treble podcast, which you can always find at notreble.com. My name is Mitch Joel. Let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
Hi, I'm a musician. My name is Jeff Berlin. I'm a bass player. I've been around for some years in contemporary music. I would say probably since the middle 1970s, where my career got started. And I was fortunate, and am fortunate, to be in this industry, and fortunate to play the art form that I love and the mechanical vocational approach to music that I love as well. So I'm a lucky guy. I'm a musician.
I'm so happy you agreed to do this, Jeff. And I was thinking to myself as you were speaking, at what point in age or experience do you go, I've been doing this a long time? Right? It's like
Well, I have been doing this a long time. It's the one thing I think, the only thing I've ever done that I guess might be considered a lifelong endeavor. Everything else sort of comes, goes, shifts, changes, amalgamated to something else, if that's the right word. It's just a changing thing, but music is sort of eternal with me, and I'm very fortunate about that. So
I wonder if you've ever thought about that. What do you think it is about you, your life, that drew you to music and that made it this eternal thing? It's a consistent theme that I've heard over many, many years of speaking to many, many artists. And I think about my own life and how I speak to so many different people, especially in terms of the business world. And you really hear it when it comes to music, and in particular with musicians, that sort of eternal gnawing and pull.
yes, I think it's in music, in my experience, once the effect of it is impacted on your body, the sense of the physical response, and I go by body first, the physical response of the sensation of feeling music resonate through you. Of course, going by the audio, the audible part of it, that when you hear music, the body audio element seems to be combined, at least in my experience, and that when I was a violinist, it wasn't my favorite time in music because it wasn't a musical instrument that moved me. And yet, my mother and father saw in me a musical propensity. And I think that a lot of my colleagues had probably exactly the same experience, where when we're younger, Picasso drew in the sand or on his wall, Greg, what's his name? Let's go with Tiger Woods. Was a golf prodigy as a child. There's certain propensities, probably based in DNA, that a certain skill set has been programmed in, and in that I've discovered that music has permanently become a part of the body. It's a sensation that could be maybe attributable to morphine, in that whenever I play, and I've discussed this with other colleagues, we're high. We're truly in a different area of reality at the time that we're playing, because we're not thinking about it. We've long gotten past the part of like, what's the name of that note? And we've gotten to where that note must be played now. And there is a kind of a narcotic effect, because you'll come off of a gig and you're literally need time to calm down. Musicians sometimes can't get to sleep, and it's just from a 45-minute to an hour show. So there is an addictive element to it. There is actually a spiritual element to it. So I'm not in any way alone in this, but I know the experience intimately, and it's transforming. It's something that has such an impact that I can't figure out where to get the same sensation anywhere else. So in a part of an addictive element, and in part of the joy of associating with other, fellow musical addicts, there is a kind of a camaraderie, a kinship, a kismet. We're all in the same area of expression, exploration, hopefully realizing what we wish to, and often when we don't, we're in a state of depression.
But there's something interesting about the impact of music on the being, right? Like there is a part where we're heavily influenced by it, and I'm sort of in a different camp where it's so heavily influenced me. It took me on a very different journey in terms of writing about music, publishing magazines, then a different direction. But I did play electric bass actually as well. But I
Ah,
came to a realization that I didn't have that same feeling in the playing and creating of it as I did in the enjoyment of consuming it, if you know what I'm saying. And there is a bit of that gap between how music affects the person versus the people who then take that can create and actually can create at skill with it.
right. Well, I have the idea, perhaps just if I can go out on a limb, that when you were a player, I'm guessing you didn't get into the learning element of it that profoundly. Is that possible?
I mean, it's hard to know, right? You take some private lessons, you play with some friends. I actually studied it at post-secondary, and I just sort of looked at myself, my peers, what was going on, and felt, I don't know if that's who I am. But
Okay.
I still love tinkering. My joke is that I tell people I know how to play bass. I don't know if I'm a bass player.
Well, I think anybody that owns an instrument and plays it is a I mean, a player. If I putt at the miniature golf and hit that ball under the windmill and over the round of loop to loop, I guess in kind of an ironic manner, I'm a little bit of a golfer here, I suppose.
Right.
Not attributable to the professionals that do it, so much better, but your lack of pursuit probably was determined by the fact, just by chatting for a couple of moments with you here, meeting you here, or we met at NAM, but that you're a relaxed and grounded human being. And what I've noticed in a great way, musicians that pursue music are not very grounded, and are in fact fairly anxious, reasonably hyper, and oddly constructed beings in this world. Because all of my colleagues and I share one thing: we're odd, and there's room for the odd in the world. If you're odd and kind and odd and law-abiding, there's room for us. But the personality often determines how dedicated one might be to learning and playing. And in my case, I came from a fairly strange and destructive kind of upbringing. I mean, it was what's the word that they say? It was an unhealthy family. There's a word, but it's eluding me now. Dysfunctional is the word. And it's not that they were mean-spirited for its own sake, but my father was a Holocaust survivor. He ran from the Germans. He wasn't in a camp. My grandparents died in Poland, but he ran, and he had some stories, and he was traumatized by this. And my mother had her own traumas, and then these two traumatized people got together and had 4 children. And when you grow up in an environment of post-Holocaust era, with also a mom who had her own issues, the children's roots are not formed well. Music, ironically, gave me an out, and I grew up unhealthy psychologically, never found my balance till very recently, which we'll talk about later if you wish. But music is what saved me. And I noticed a lot of stories about musicians that the greater the musician, in oft times, the quirkier they are. Musicians are not coincidentally abusers of drugs or alcohol. There is something twisted, I feel, in the psyche of us that pursue music as a career or as a spiritual pursuit, and we are not normal per se. And I use the word normal with parentheses. So that seems to determine why you, long way around the barn to get to this point, did not become a musician, possibly in the same way that you might have, because I sense that groundedness, and you just thought, I'll pursue music from another way.
It's nice of you to say. I think people think I'm probably batshit crazy, but I'll go with you. Sure.
No, you're not batshit crazy. You know what you are? You
Tell
might
me.
be expressive and free, and I know you're being ironic and just silly, but
Right.
you're not batshit crazy. Batshit crazy, I think, is its own definition, and I mean it's a funny euphemism for the extreme elements. I mean, poor Jocko, who had a chemical imbalance, but if you look at his history, he was very hurt by his upbringing as well from parental difficulties. And we musicians, at any particular level of our ability, even from let's say, the mercenary sort of vocational pursuer of a horn, a guy that learns how to play and didn't become a genius, but became a very good, lucid, and capable musician, often comes from a place where something odd was going on. And Jocko, I only mention him as the extreme story. He's sort of the poster boy for us all who had lamentably, is that the right word?
Probably lamented, yeah.
Lamented that his story, so publicized, is ironically a similar story to many of us that play, just not as extreme. We have not gotten to that awful result. And had he had help, it would have calmed his maybe heart and maybe made him happier. Because I can tell you, I'm a recovering lunatic.
But I often tell people on the business side of my world that I think great leaders are driven by only one of three things, and there's nuances within it. I think it's power, profit, or fame. So, power is, you want to be in control and do those sorts of things. Profit is you're driven by the bottom line. And fame is you want people to notice what you're doing and have attention to it. And I know for sure in the business world, for me, it definitely is the fame thing. And I feel when you go to the musician level, it's 100% that, because there is this sort of, you want people to pay attention to the art you're creating. And in and of itself, it's a surefire cauldron of anxiety and stress, without adding in things like, I get off stage and there's 100 people, 1,000 people paying attention to me, and now I'm alone in a hotel room, to the other things that would create the need for other stimulants or ways to connect. I mean, it seems so sort of practical and pragmatic when you think about it, but living within it can be tormenting for even those who don't have medical issues.
I think you nailed it. I agree with everything you said, and I'll use me as an example of exactly the power, the control, and the fame and the money you said. In my case, as Jocko was a poster child for a dysfunctional ending to a sad story for our greatest bass genius. I am also a poster child for anger, fear, and the effort that I put out for decades to hide it, and how it was hidden was a false ego, great overstated comments, statements that enraged people, and I didn't, give a damn. I said, I'm not wrong, and the heck with them. And when in my story, I constructed, because I didn't have a strong upbringing, I constructed over the years a way to live.
An archetype.
An archetype, I did. And my archetype was, and I think we all do it. In fact, if you look at somebody that's, fervently religious, or fervently a Republican, or fervently whatever, or a Democrat, usually construct or have been taught to construct these philosophies. In my case, I was constantly amazed on how people that I occasionally ran into seemed to be grounded, polite, kind, smiled in a natural manner. And I didn't understand how one could achieve this. And in order not to, I guess, go crazy, I said, I'm the baddest bass player, and and you're going to love me, love me, love me, love me, love me. And that, begat a hyper, out of control, fairly egotistical and unnatural human psyche, and it was decades long.
But full disclosure on this, Jeff, and I want you to take this from the sincere place that it's coming from, which is as a person who played and loved the instrument, I was at arm's length from a lot of the sort of mechanics underneath it. So, and there was a gap in time where I went off and did my business thing. And this podcast that we're doing here for No Treble, I call Groove, is sort of my comeback to the music industry, my interest in the bass and the people who play it, who are these artists that are often unsung heroes. And I think typically when I go and look at people who I love and admire, it's about their technique, the gear, the riff, and I wanted to speak to the artist and figure out who those stories were and tell those stories with this platform. I never knew any of that about you, and I mean that in full honesty. I knew about your work. I knew about your work with Bruford. I knew about your work with Holdsworth. I knew about your playing. I knew the legacy of what Jeff Berlin was. And in sort of prepping for this conversation and speaking to you at NAMM, I was almost a bit taken aback because in the sort of, I guess, me being in the mass populace, not in the bass culture, I didn't feel, I just knew that there was a body of amazing work and a fascinating human being that I wanted to speak to. And so when you talk about this, I'm wondering, what was the recognition point for you where you were like, this is actually not healthy. It's not healthy for my music, my legacy, my fans. I mean, what was that?
Well, it was a point that often happens to people. I have an interesting story to share, but I'll try to make it concise so I don't bore people with it. Like, I've been in and out of therapy since I was 18 years old because I always knew something wasn't right with me. And I never knew what it was. I used to have a fantasy that the whole world, the entire planet, every tree, every rock, every building, the entire planet was covered in a sheet of cellophane, and that everybody and everything was under it. And I could not get under that sheet of cellophane to join the world. Can you get a mental picture of that?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. And this prompted me to realize that I didn't feel a part of people and of things, and I had no solution for it. So I sorted out. And my whole thing was, when people lauded my playing and were kind enough to, I won a couple of polls. They called me the best. Other bass players were very complimentary. You've heard that story about the lone superstar that commits suicide sometimes, or
Sure.
Judy Garland, or we don't know what happened to Marilyn Monroe, but she was an unhappy woman. Edith Piaf. I mean, there's a lot of tragedy in the famous element of musician. And I spent years trying to find happiness, and I tried and I tried and I tried. God, I tried like I tried to be the best musician, and I couldn't do it. I never quite acquired what I was seeking. And there was always this angst. I would do these, posts on Facebook, and I have a buddy, Mac Bakulik, who worked at the Players School. I don't work there anymore, but he would look at it and say, Jeff, do not put this post out. And I would say, why not? And it would say, Jeff, you're
it's a lightning
yourself.
rod, yeah.
It's a lightning rod. And I put them out. And, what happened was, if I may, when I was 60, I had what might be considered a collapse. And I was in my house, and all of a sudden, with unprepared, I just lost it. I just fell apart. And a guitar player friend named LaRue Nicholson, who's one of Tampa Bay's greatest jazz guitarists, I went online and said, look, I need a therapist. I need some help. I said, look, I've been doing this for 40 years. All right, here I go back again. I'll go to somebody, spill my heart out, and nothing's going to change. He said, go to this person, Beth Meeker, who lives in Clearwater, in St. Pete, and she'll help you. And I went to Beth, and Beth was, I would say, the first person who got me to go inside instead of outside, meaning the scariest place for me was to go in and feel everything that I felt. And I wasn't just scared, Mitch. I was terrified, and I was terrified for 8 months. And I was on the floor in my condo. I was out of my mind sobbing. Then I was touring, I was going out doing gigs, and I would tell the guys, look, I'm in a therapy thing. I'll be professional, but when I'm done, I'm sitting in the back of the van. Please don't be offended, but I can't talk to anybody now. And I didn't say a word, which is, of course, ironic for me. But I didn't say a
That's not your
word.
brand.
Not my brand. I'm a chatterer. But I didn't say a word to anybody, and they would look at me and kind of askance and say, "What's going?" I said, "Trust me, it's nothing. You guys, I'm in this thing." And then I'd be alone, and I would fall apart again. And you know what? They put people in hospitals when they're like this, and they drug them up. Beth said, "Do not go to a hospital. You're not dangerous. You're not dangerous to yourself. You're not dangerous to anybody. You are going through a thing called the dark night of the soul."
Mhm.
And she offered me literature, and I read about it, and it is a point where the construction of our lives that we make, our beliefs, we're so firmly into it that if it's constructed on weak ground or made of weak beliefs and weak principles, often what mom and dad taught us, that's really generational. Often with people that are seeking to improve themselves, it'll come apart. And when it comes apart, I came apart. And for 7 months, man, I was a wreck. But in the eighth month, I actually felt myself hitting the floor. It was, I talked to her and I got so low that it terrified me, and I felt a physical boom where I felt that myself hitting the bottom, the lowest I could possibly go in this experience. And from that day, I started to go up.
Hmm.
And this is my experience in it. I had gone to where I had to feel everything. And that's the trick. We don't want to think, what do we do? How do I get out of this? What do I do? And the trick is you don't do anything. You feel it. You realize it. And as Buddha said to something that terrified him, because I was reading some Buddhism, he invited it to tea. I'm scared of you. He avoided the spirit. I can't recall the name. And one day he said, "You know what? Come to tea. Sit down and have tea with me." And the example is that when I finally began to feel everything, it came out. It came up. There was nothing hidden. It just came up and it came up and it came up. And the terrifying feelings don't kill us. Don't send us to a mental hospital. It freaks us out. It freaks us out. Us, this community, us people that finally have the nerve, the strength to say, okay, come what may, I'm not hiding anything. And when I went through this experience and read about the dark night of the soul, when you're in it, you can't get out of it. You can't do anything to get out of it. You are stuck in that. So ride that train to
So
the end.
this happens, Jeff, when you're 60,
60,
and you're how old today?
63. And
So,
I had another one in December.
so this is, I'm really curious about this because when you have this moment, the other part is not that this typically happens when you're younger. People go through different cycles and there's chemical things going on and there's biological, physiological. There are things going on here that are bigger than just somebody's not feeling too happy today and they hit this dark night of the soul. But at 60, you're set in your ways. You have your what you think is that archetype or that story that you've told yourself. So it's not only disruptive, but it's life changing at a very strange time in your life.
Interestingly, there's a guy, what's his name? Hold on. I want you to know his name. I know we're on doing this recording. I'm looking at Google now. I'm going to tell you his name.
That's okay.
Hold on. I'm almost there. Dr. Joe Dispenza. Dr. Joe Dispenza is a guy who was injured in a biking accident. And when he was all alone in the hospital, recognized that he could internalize his healing, and by dint of mental work, learned how to heal himself and to get in touch with the internal difficulties of his life and come to terms with them. And the reason that I mention this is because one of the things he said is, and I just watched a video the other day, is he said, and I'm nearly quoting, oh, he says, "Oh, it's wonderful. I see people in their 60s, 70s, and in their 80s that become aware that change is necessary because a person in his 80s could live to 90. A person in his 80s could live 3 more years. If he's 81, could live to 84, and why not spend them in peace?" So you're right, and that people, if they're fortunate, would have it earlier in life. I had it at 60, and then recently had another one at 63, and it freaked me out. And I said, "What's going on?" I went back to Beth because I still see her, and she's like a resigned therapist. She gave up her license. She doesn't really believe in therapy, but at the same time, she ingrained therapeutic principles with spiritual ones, and she is simply the most enlightened human being that I've personally ever met in this area, because from her instruction, she changed my life. And I recall just about 3 months ago, I was dancing in her office like a kid, saying to her, it's almost, do you recall the 1951 movie Scrooge with Alistair Sim?
Sure, sure.
And when Scrooge woke up, he's going, I don't know what to do. I'm as light as a feather. And he was dancing around his apartment saying, I don't know anything. And that was me. And 3 weeks later, I fell apart. And I said to her, what the hell is this, man? I said, I'm feeling great. What in the world is going on? And she said, in this process, because I have a lifetime to unlearn and ingrain, what's the word? Become connected with and touch upon and realize. She says that people who go through their first dark night of the soul become stronger, so that eventually they are strong enough to go through what might be considered their second experience of utter terror, fear, where another level that hasn't been attended to the first time comes through. Now, I'm talking a lot here, but people that are in difficulty, I'm guaranteeing you there's a way out of this, man. There is a way out of this, because I'm still in a slight depression now, but it's of a different ilk. I'm so attentive to the spiritual end of what I'm going through. This is from a guy who worked hard to be an atheist. I'll argue with you a la Christopher Hitchens, where you're wrong to have a spiritual bent in the universe, schmooniverse, and God and Jesus and Moses and all of it. You're all nuts.
Dust to dust.
Dust to dust. That's
So,
it.
so,
Go
so
ahead.
talk a little bit about what happens to you then publicly in terms of this stuff on Facebook, this hard attitude or brand that you have about learning, this sort of archetype that was created, and what you want people to know about you now, because I think it does have an effect on even the work you're trying to create now.
Well, when it became clear to me, I tried since I was 60 to be nice. And I'm saying that, yeah, you're laughing. I'm glad you got that. I was trying to be nice. Okay, I'm sorry I did everything wrong. I'm sorry I messed with teachers and everybody. Okay, 3 months later, every teacher sucks. And then, oops, I did it again. I'm really sorry. This time I really learned my lesson. And then 6 months later, all base teachers, they don't know shit. Oh, I did it again. And this went on for a good 2-3 years, and I could not organically come to a place of acceptance. After this last dark night that I had, and I equate it with spiritualism. And let me tell you, people that go through this depression, when they come out, we're always grateful that there's enough literature about that suffering, not suffering like sticking your hand on a hot stove, but suffering in the connection of the awful parts of us produces great results. Moses wandering through the desert's a great analogy. Jesus wandering in the, talking to the devil, tempted for 40 days and 40 nights, these things are little bits of lessons that suffering for a higher purpose has benefit. And often we don't go there because it hurts, but I had to. I was forced into it. So for whoever forced or whatever forced me, I got the message that people are different, learn differently if they wish. Teachers are different in that they believe in their methods, just as I believe in mine. And I got finally, I think organically and profoundly, that my wish is to join the community of teachers and join with people, if they wish me, and offer what I believe are the finest and most guaranteed ways to learn how to improve as a musician. But the first thing I had to do was own all the garbage that I had laid out for decades and apologize publicly. That was a hell of a piece of humble pie to eat, man. But I've come to have to learn to enjoy the flavor of humble pie, because I do it all the time.
So In French, we call it rapprochement. As
Rapprochement.
it's this sort of like the rapprochement would be like building the bridge, making those connections, trying to redo them. 3 years in, is it being accepted, and is the output of it what you want it to be as a bass player?
I don't know.
Hmm.
And that's kind of not the point for me. Meaning, if I get a good positive response or reaction, I'm pleased. If I didn't, perhaps there's a reason for it. One of the great things now as a bass player, as a guy that offers advice, is I'm not committed anymore to manipulating anything for a result. That's a beautiful bit of garbage to chuck into the garbage can. So now what I can do is offer the best that I have, the best that I am, and let people feel, decide for themselves. And either my sort of repentant ways and my growth as a spiritual human being, my respect for humanity, my respect for my colleague, it's embraced or it isn't. So be it. It's up to me for my own edification, my own self benefit to eat that humble pie, meaning it honestly, and never enter back into that critical area that still lurks somewhere beneath the skin. It's a long process for me to, not say, these guys at this school, they don't know, what they're doing. And this bass player and this teacher, it was that part of me, that injured part of me. And now that I'm more into the conscious area, meaning witnessing what I do and say, I'm a lot more alert to what goes on out of me, in me. And so as a bass player, either people will accept it or not. In the meantime, I'm giving the best that I have. I'm honestly this new person, and new in the sense that Scrooge was new. I love that analogy. You know what he sang when he woke up on that movie? And I sing this song sometimes to myself. He sang, I don't know anything. I never did know anything. But now I know that I don't know, all on a Christmas morning. And then he goes, I must stand on my head. I must stand on my head. Because the child came out in him. And that's my song. I don't know anything. I never did know anything, Mitch. But now I know that I don't know.
But but a part of the persona is being provocative. Is that black and white? Like, I am still Jeff Berlin. I am still this player. I do still have this pedigree, this discography, this style that being provocative has done well for you for your career. Does that have to be turned off, or is it sort of now aligned in another way? Or as you said, it just sort of maybe is below the surface?
It was provocative for its own sake, and I want nothing to do with it anymore. And what I do feel is that in an ironic sense, I still feel I'm right, about teaching. I just won't criticize anyone who doesn't agree.
So talk a little bit about that, Jeff, because, and I mean, it is something that has been obviously put out there. You've put it out there yourself. It's been in
Sure.
conversations. What is it about this instrument and teaching that has, for lack of a better analogy, the top spinning?
Define top spinning.
It makes you get going. It gets you going. It gets, for a lot of players, it's like, hey, we learn how we learn, and the output is just sort of the feel, and the feel is all that matters. But for some reason, I feel like there's something in you wanting to really have a hand in how this is taught.
Gotcha. Well, I'll base it on a question. Name anything that you can think of that you pay to learn where the facts are not taught. Can you?
In the art world, I think you can. I think you can teach the mechanics of it, but the spirit of what you do with that tool, yeah, I mean, I could think about writing a school. I could think about a lot. Like, you can learn grammar. Doesn't mean you're going to be able to pull that sentence together.
Well, my question was more specific. Name anything you pay to learn, anything, in the arts or out of the arts, regarding, let's say, an art school or vocational school or elementary and high school or college, or swimming lessons or tennis lessons or anything you can name. Can you name anything in your thinking that you pay to learn where the facts, that means the function of that thing, the mechanical goings on of that thing, are not taught first in those lessons?
No, clearly not. You got to have those basics, yeah.
Okay. It's a simple question, and I think in that you seeing this, it's sort of a question that I see that doesn't seem to exist in base education, whereby in the nature of driving a car, we're taught factually, mechanically, and literally by the letter of the law how to do this. Swimming lessons, of course, done in the shallow end of the pool, hopefully, is done,
Well,
very
sometimes they do toss them in and see what happens.
well.
But go on. Yeah,
That's a terrible way to teach a kid.
exactly.
They don't do that anymore. They
Yeah,
do
they
it
don't.
on Family Guy, perhaps.
Yeah,
But
back in the old days.
so back in the old days. So in that logic, that everything that is mechanical is taught, and even going to art school, when they teach painting, they teach this canvas versus that canvas, using these paints, water versus oils versus pastels versus chalk, using this light, using these
Brushes. Yeah.
shades of gray. It's a very mechanical thing. Even religion is taught. Today we're going to look at, I don't know, Matthew such and such chapters 2 and 3. And God said this and that and that and this. And a whole sermon can be recited based on a specific bit of Bible text. And Sunday school is also, let's look at what happened in Joshua. Let's look what happened in Leviticus. Everything that I can see that has been taught for pay or for edification is taught factually. What I took notice of is that music, at least on my instrument, doesn't seem to be taught the same way that everything else is. Now, this is just my view, and here's where I say I don't say these things to cause harm anymore. I did. It was just my old anger. But I want people to think about it and notice that music seems to be taught from performance. Even you mentioned it earlier. You can teach art or teach, people want to play. But before you can play, there's what I call nobody or few people go to the left enough in music education, meaning to the left starting to the right is the result. And my joke was, well, in Israel, you start at the right and then go to the left. But we don't take students in general, I can't say everywhere, base students, and say to them, no matter what you do, you don't know what a minor triad is. Because I equate this with no matter how you speak English, young man from Appalachia in the 1930s in hillbilly country, you don't know what a verb is. You can't write anything except your name. And the poverty element of that period related in part, I know there was a depression going on, to the lack of education that was pandemic or certainly epidemic in that area. So lack of education always seemed to denote poverty and a bad way of life. And you could see this everywhere in the world. In music, I equated the lack of understanding of music as a general community of bass players that are in a bit of a musical poverty area, but don't really either know about it or really don't care. And this is their right. But in music education, I found out that if you take anybody who has paid money to learn how to play, the rules have changed. The student no longer has the right to say what he wants to do and how he wants to do it. Hello there, Mr. Tiger Woods. Here's money. I want to learn how to play golf, but I don't want to, hold the club this way. And I don't want to, do this over at Palm Beach because I don't like the weather there, and I don't want to this, and I don't want to hit the ball like that. So we've gotten very permissive with students. In fact, I think some schools allow it. I think teachers will allow it. Not what do you want to do or let me hear you play, but we have given into the hands of unqualified students the right to make decisions for themselves that they're not qualified to make. So here comes Jeff saying, in my opinion, it's wrong. I mean, you don't find that in law school. You don't find that in medical school. You don't even find that in learning how to sew. I mean, a cooking class, it's mechanical. And bass players, I took note, don't take notice of the importance of the mechanics of music. Mm. And for that reason, to me, the community of bass is in a low point. When in truth, 3 to 6 months of a firm, strict education, which, by the way, my hope or belief is if somebody loves music so much, they're willing to do it. Let's go back to our late friend Jocko. He learned how to arrange music in a bus and in a hotel room. You get me?
Totally.
His thing was, he sat down, the guy says, when you do these voicings, this is what it is. It was a mechanical undertaking. It was not an artistic one. And yet, bass players aren't that willing to do this. So my contribution is to, at this point, not criticize anybody, but say, I feel there's a better way to learn.
And it feels to me, as somewhat of an outsider in this, that you have this deep respect for the craft and that it's all ships rise scenario when we apply ourselves to respect the fact that it's a craft.
Well, yes. In fact, the craft is so perfect and so without flaw. It is the only guaranteed method that one can pursue in a classroom or with a teacher or anywhere. It's the only guaranteed method that is learning mechanical, factual, harmonic, and rhythmical musical exercises and playing. It's the only manner that will raise 100% of everybody to be a better musician than they are today. What will happen is the more brilliant musician will get there faster. The less brilliant musician will get there slower or never achieve what the more brilliant guy will achieve. But let's look at golf again. There's 100,000 golf courses in America, and they all have a golf pro that teaches business people, non-pros, how to play golf. And they'll teach them how to hold the clubs. And it's occurred to me that if I were a golfer, wouldn't I extract more joy if I knew how to play the game in such a manner that my ball isn't dribbling down the course? You know, on a par 4, I actually end up hitting like a 32, you know, or slicing into the left or slicing to the right or heading, you know, having no control over the ball. My question would be, what's the fun? What's the joy in that? And because of my Facebook interactions, I've taken notice that there is a large community of guys now that, oh boy, let me think how I don't go back into old Jeffisms here. Let me think, because I don't want to cross that line. It occurs to me that there's a large group of bassists that seem to be content to not sounding or playing well, and have often said, well, if I were a professional, I would take heed of what Jeff says.
Right, right.
When the ironic thing is, if they took heed of what I say and found either me or a like-minded guy, it'll cut, check this out, Mitch, it'll cut years and decades off their wandering around, because there's some guys that are listening to this have been wanderers in bass for decades. You ever seen a flat line on a movie when a guy passes away? Picture that with a little bit of a hitch going up and a little bit of a hitch going down. Many bass, and I know this because I teach a lot of these guys now. They come to me, and these guys have flatlined at a certain level for 30 years. Some guys for 20, some 10, and because they haven't done anything to improve their lot, but they say they're content to be there. And here's where I have to be quiet and say, if this is the choice of people to buy a bass and function there, it's of course, their choice.
Right.
I'm proposing that anybody, you, Mitch, if you studied with me, I'll improve you in 4 weeks.
I believe that. I've seen you go.
Not to do what I do.
No,
I'll teach you the factual elements of bass and get you around the instrument so that you will,
And there's it's that foundational thing that puts you in a place where you can make other choices. And sometimes we say things, I believe, that are limiting because we actually fear the work that it takes to remove them. So it's easier to just sort of splurt out those things when in reality it's about, getting to the work. The other part that I'm really curious about, Jeff, with you is your mindset around the industry of music, which is obviously it's your life, it's your career. And I know that because you've been literally through the ringer for the years that you've been playing, performing, recording, and a part of the industry, and that's the industry side of it, that you've definitely had your own few choice words about where the industry is and where it's going. And yet I feel like recently it's almost like the technology and all the negative things that happen to the industry have almost turned around, where I think about what you're doing now on Pledge Music with this Jack Bruce stuff, which I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about. And I
Sure.
feel it's like the technology is actually finally working in your favor a little bit now, where you can actually go directly to the people who love and care for you and have them support, which is ultimately, I think, what artists want to have happen.
Well, it is. The Jack Bruce thing is important, but in terms of technology, I recognize that this is a time now where musicians use videos and they try to share their thing and try to acquire gigs and networking and databases and whatever seems to be done. I'm fairly unaware of a lot of this stuff. I've actually turned into Grandpa Berlin, and a lot of these things are a little foreign to me. There was a statement made. Steve Bailey is a friend of mine, and he teaches at Berkeley. He's the head of the Berkeley bass department, and he made a statement that the time is over, I think, if I'm remembering it correctly, where just learning a bass guitar is sufficient in this era to make a career, that there's more that needs to be learned. And I imagine that that's a true statement, and my only caveat, is that the right word for this, or
Sure.
addition, would be is before one can, let's say, take advantage of the technology of the day, doesn't one have to know how to play? It always seems to come back to the basic go to the left, start at the beginning, learn the content, and as one improves this way, by the way, in a second I'll tell you this, in my opinion, there's only two ways to learn, and then I'd like to know your opinion about that, so
Sure.
we'll get back to that. So while the technology in the industry has changed, it still goes to the point that if you, me, I, us, them, she, he, I am you and we are he and goo goo gajoob. If we, that's a Beatles song, by the way, for
We are the
anybody.
walrus. Yeah, we are the walrus. Exactly.
I am the walrus, So if people don't know how to play, I imagine that all the technology and all the technical and necessary accoutrements of our industry aren't going to promote you to have a career if you're not qualified at first to hold an instrument and make good music on it. So even if this statement is true, it still behooves me to say, learn your bass first, learn your guitar first, learn your drums first, and then utilize the technique of this modern era that wasn't around when I was a kid, or when Stanley or Jocko or Alfonso Johnson or any of us were playing. What goes on today was not the norm. So, but we could play. So that's the encouragement I give people. Learn to play. Really, take the time. If you love music, it oughtn't be a challenge. That's the ironic thing. I love to play bass, and I still practice. I sit down and I practice. Where's my bass? Can you hear this a little bit? Can you hear my bass?
We can hear your bass, Jeff. We all want to hear your bass.
Do you?
Sure.
So I learned that line, and then I play it. So I'll practice lines and practice things, and if that's too fast, people do Donna Lee. So I'll do the head of Donna Lee and go, now check this out. Now, I stop there. I don't learn the whole song. I now take that line and do it in D flat. Right? Then I'll do it in F sharp. Where is that? F sharp. So by taking a segment of music that is unnatural to one and playing it in 12 keys, I become a better bass player. So that's a little bit of a lesson where people usually, if they do it, sort of go do it because of Jocko's presentation of the song. But I found a way to make it academic. Just take that, what is that, first 2 or 4 bars, and it's like first 3-ish bars, and do it in 12 keys. So I know I went off the beaten path for a moment, but one can improve so quickly if one does things that makes one think and enter into a slightly area of uncomfortability.
Was that one of the two ways to learn, or did you want to quickly go through those two ways to learn before you wrap it up?
Okay. Here's the two ways. And tell me if you can think of a third. My guess is, so far I've mentioned this, nobody has, and I'm always curious if somebody can come up with one. So here we go. Sounds like a game show. Mitch, here are the two ways.
Thankfully, we have comments after we post the podcast, and people can comment in there as well, so they can add in their thoughts as well. But go ahead, let's talk about the two.
Cool. I'm very interested to see what people might think. Here we go. The two ways that I believe that one can learn are quite simple and quite to the point. First way is self-taught. Self-taught works. Hendrix is self-taught. Jocko, for the most part, was self-taught. He was also academically trained. Jack Bruce is academically trained but self-taught. Chris Squire is self-taught. All the great musicians that had not had benefit of a lesson, but in fact went into their own investigations, are self-taught. And the method works. In fact, 100% of all of us that play are self-taught. I know you personally were self-taught to some degree when you were a bass player.
Sure.
Okay. The second way to learn, in my opinion, is academically. Academically, to me, means a teacher says these are these principles of music: count, subdivide, develop your ear. And by attending to this, you're learning the way that has been described, the language of music. The language of music has been described. I think Victor Wooten talks about the language of music. I think other guys do too. And the language of music, if associated with language, is not just learned by ear, but has been honed and refined by a good 12 years in elementary to high school of writing essays, writing, hello, mother, hello, father, see, spot, run, 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 and then developing that through the grades, that everybody that learned any language by ear, and this is 100% of the people listening to this now, have all refined their language skill through academic training, without exception. And because of that, they've gotten so good that they can write a post below our podcast saying, I am deeply offended, or I am deeply moved, or, this, but what about this situation? And, the varieties of ways that people will hear and, come up with their thoughts. And that's an emotionally artistic, expressive experience. So the only two ways that I can think of that one learns is either being self-taught, which means any records, any bands, all kind of jams, different guitars, different strings, different CDs to listen to, imitate, what else? Different drummers, different guitarists with different drummers, different bassists with different keyboard players, extracting stuff from the internet, extracting stuff anywhere. You're on your own and you're tutoring yourself. And the other way is going to me or someone like me or a school or somebody who says, these are academic principles. And as far as I can tell, there is no other way to learn how to play. I'll put that out and see what people think. And actually curious to know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I'm stumped. I'm not sure in all of the scenarios I can think of, in the myriad of skills and things I've tried to capture. I think you're right. And I think it's also journey-based, which is along the way of having a knack, whether for me it was writing or doing conversations like this, you then hopefully pursue some more academic ways. You get coaching, you formalize it, So I do think that that within a healthy journey, if you will, it's almost natural that those two are the way.
I would agree, and I couldn't quite think of a third option.
Yeah, nor does there have to be one, maybe.
Well, ironically, I've noticed in bass there's a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, an eighth, and a ninth. And it's here that a what's the word? A little bell goes off in me and says, are these other methods going to create the musicians that they promise to make? Right. And it's here where there is a politically correct view that I will subscribe to. One chooses what they wish. One decides what is best for them. And what I decided was that that's true in the artistic result. In other words, art is universal. Art is eternal. Eternity. You could do anything with no encumbrance, no hesitation, nothing that holds you back. It's art. In the academic And again, I'm going by, I said before, everything is learned this way. Let's go back to the 400 years of music learned. I think the Catholic Church invented written music. I think it was 4 lines and a staff to celebrate God. And it became a 5-line staff, and everybody, through effort and study, became great. Even Bach, I could quote him. He said something like, I'm not that great. I just worked hard and learned how to do this, and anybody could do it. That's a little bit of modesty from the 17th century, but everybody in music since 4 or more centuries has learned music practically the exact same way. The only thing that's changed was music itself. So when Bach was taught academically, some teacher or teachers said, this is a G, this is an A, this is this is figure bass, the terms for classical writing, this is this and this is that. And when you get to the era of Debussy, it's 19th, 20th century, the musical content changed. The actual meaning of it changed. And it was that Debussy and Ravel had to learn. But the method of learning is the same. And they always mention George Gershwin. George Gershwin learned music in a tenement building in New York City. The method of learning has always been the same. Now, some may mention Suzuki. Suzuki, I don't know, but it's a method, and it uses music. There's teachers have tried this, tried that, and for various reasons. Some people may be learning impaired. Some people are physically impaired. You have to take that into account. But the 99.99% manner of learning has always been, check it out, always the same approach, which is, here's your music, practice it. Practice on a piano, write these exercises out. Beethoven studied with Neefe, he studied with Salieri, he studied with Haydn, he studied with Mozart, studied with Albrecht, I think his name was. He had a multitude of teachers who said this exercise should be learned. Today, bass players learn groove. Today, bass players learn feel. Today, bass players use metronomes. Now, there's a whole list of things that has seemingly replaced the academic pursuit first, whereas play with feeling, play with emotion. Do you realize that anybody that, in my opinion, that plays a bass or a guitar plays with feeling? Why? They went out to a store, made the trip, bought a guitar, came home, plugged it in. Who plays without feeling in that manner? Everybody has feeling. What we don't have as a group or individually is the ability to know where to put our fingers. And ironically, at least to me, I don't see that much emphasis on it at all. Rather, the direction seems to go towards the performance. But learning and performance are different. And I'm not sure that they belong together, since they never have been ever. They never taught emotional music. They were never taught. Again, go to anybody. Again, Tchaikovsky, Brahms. I mean, going to the classical. Look at Louis Armstrong, who was an orphan, a street kid in the 9th District, I think it was, in old New Orleans. Picked up a horn, and then his teacher taught him. What did his teacher teach him? Content, academics. Blow like this, That's a technical way to learn how to play trumpet.
Right, exactly.
Or trigger came into the room. So that's how you learn. But that does not seem to be a bass-focused thing. Maybe people may show me where I'm wrong, but I don't see it. I'm on the internet. I see lessons, and I don't see it. So, but then again, people are entitled and deserve to make their own choices. And I keep saying this because the concept is still new to me. Yeah. To not criticize. I'm just simply reporting a view, and one can agree or not as they wish.
Jeff, I can't thank you enough for your time. It's such a pleasure and honor to speak with you as someone who's admired your work for so long, and thank you for all the great things you've helped to push the instrument forward. I can't thank you enough. Let people know where they can find your great stuff online, and also let them know about the Pledge Music project that's going on.
Sorry, I just did that.
Force of habit, yeah.
It is force of habit. The Jack Bruce project is a project near and dear to my heart. Jack was my hero. I loved him, his playing, some of the Cream songs, the live Cream, really over the.
And he admired you as well.
You know what an honor that is for me? You know what an honor that is for me to know that? Jack was a dear, dear friend, and when he passed, it hurt me greatly. Actually, I was in Germany on tour, and a friend called up and said, "Did you hear that Jack had passed away?" And instantly I said, I must do a record to honor him. So I entitled it, Jeff Berlin Plays Jack Bruce, Songs for a Whaler, but I believe I'm going to change the title and take me out of the equation. I think it would be better to sort of call it Jack Tunes or, all-star tribute to Jack Bruce rather than putting me in it. I arranged it. I'll be band leader, but I don't really want to put me as the focus. I'd rather put Jack and his music as the focus and use the great players that have, done me the honor to accept playing with me. It's pledgemusic.com/projects/Jeff Berlin Plays Jack Bruce. And it's a pledge campaign because in the old days we would record a record and then advertise it and sell it. And now I think John Anderson did a pledge campaign.
Many have, yeah. We're gonna all pay in to make sure this project comes to fruition. We all got skin in the game. That's why I like to say it.
Yeah, I mean, people trusting that this is going to be a really magnificent thing. I've worked it out of my head. My producer and I are chomping at the bit. We have a record company that wants to participate. We're looking for investors, actual bona fide, there's Wall Street guys, that love music and play. And often, want to, hang with the big boys in the music. I'd like to hang with Bill Gates a little bit and Zuckerberg, but I don't think they want to hang with me. But
and your other stuff, everybody can find at jeffberlin.com, right?
They can find it really there or a Facebook page.
Great.
Am I talking too much?
No, it's great, Jeff. I just want to I want to be respectful of your time. I can't thank you enough, and hoping we can catch up in another couple episodes and see how things are going with you.
That's a pleasure, Mitch. Thank you, bro, for having me. I really, when I do these things, it's an honor for me. So
it's an honor for us, Jeff. Thanks so much.
It's a pleasure, Mitch. Thank you, bro.